Update, brought to you by Simcox Advocates, advising businesses and families since 1949. Visit simcox.com or call 690 300. Manx Radio's Update with Andy Wint.
Faster, my good evening. It's 5:30. This is Update for Wednesday, 27th of September 2023 from Manx Radio. 30 minutes to look at the latest on the Isle of Man, background to the news and sport, business, Sea-Watch, travel updates, and the newsmakers in person this evening. Storm Agnes brings yellow and amber weather warnings tonight. £1 billion income, but we're still dipping into reserves. After 140 years, Moore's Kipper Yard's closing its doors. Dilapidated properties red tape needs to go, says MHK, and the Ravens were on the wrong end of Bury last night.
Man Benham for all your business and legal needs.
First of all, at 29 minutes ahead of 6 o'clock, the Update News headlines. Fastamai Chanel Suku.
Fastamai. Storm Agnes is causing gale to severe gale force winds on the island, with an amber weather warning for coastal overtopping and minor inner harbour flooding expected at 9 p.m. A tree's brought down one of the electricity poles at Craig Willie's Hill near Sarah's cottage, and engineers are on their way to repair it. Meanwhile, the infrastructure department says it's made sandbags available at a number of locations. A union which represents steam packet workers has branded the company dishonest, saying it hasn't entered into negotiations in good faith. Nautilus is claiming staff have been threatened with fire and rehire if they do not accept forced changes. Earlier today, the steam packet said negotiations with the union over live-on-board arrangements for staff had reached an impasse. And Aldi has announced where it wants to build a new supermarkets over the next 2 years, and the Isle of Man hasn't featured. In international news, Scotland's First Minister says he very much welcomes the approval of a room where users can safely take illegal drugs. In a UK first, the £2.3 million facility will allow people to inject themselves under medical supervision. GB News has suspended presenter Dan Watton after comments made on his programme about a female journalist by the controversial actor Lawrence Fox. And the best jobs for a pay rise have been revealed. According to tax rebate help site Rift, hair and beauty salon owners have seen the biggest increases in a year. Those were your headlines. News at 6.
Man Benham. Contact us by phone, video call, email or face-to-face. We're happy to connect with you. Manx Radio Weather with Manx Glass and Glazing.
Goromaya, thank you. Chanel from the Ronald Way Met Office. There's a gale or severe gale warning out in the North Irish Sea. State of sea moderate or rough and very rough later. On the island, cloudy with intermittent rain in a strong to gale or severe gale force southwesterly. Both wind and rain will ease overnight down to 11 degrees. For Thursday, Jordan, sunny intervals at first, turning cloudier in a strong south-southwesterly. Top temperature 16. Rain will arrive tomorrow evening, clearing overnight, 12 degrees the minimum temperature. Into Jehenya, Friday, dry with sunny spells in a fresh westerly, calming in the afternoon, so a nice afternoon, and a daylight maximum 16 degrees. The tide turned at 5 to 5. It's on the way back in. Sunset 6 minutes past 7. That late high tide at 3 minutes to 11, with a risk of coastal overtopping at Shore Road Russian, Castletown Prom, the north end of Douglas Prom, and Laxey and Ramsey Proms, and a risk of inner harbour flooding at the Tongue in Douglas, Westquay and Messeron Corner in Ramsey, and the flood defences deployed for Castletown Harbour. Low tides 21 minutes after 5 tomorrow morning, sunrise 14 minutes past 7, and the morning high water at 19 minutes past 11.
Manx Glass and Glazing are proud to be an approved contractor with Construction Isle of Man. Call the team on 674 573 or visit the showroom on the Snugborough Trading Estate.
Yellow and amber weather warnings in place for tonight. Storm Agnes reaches the Isle of Man. The latest from the Met Office and Colin Gartshaw.
We've got a warning for the gale force winds and also a warning for the coastal overtopping and a little bit of harbour flooding as well. Both of those really are for the next 12 hours or so. They will run out tonight as the winds ease down and things improve overnight. But we've got a yellow warning for for the winds. Gusts of wind will be around 55, maybe 60 miles per hour, probably peaking around 8 p.m. this evening before those winds gradually decrease overnight. So there will be a little bit of impact with that, maybe a few branches and trees blown down, but certainly the wind is nothing really particularly strong. We do get some stronger storms in this. It's probably something that we see of the order of around 10 times a year, I think, so it's certainly still something significant, but nothing too special, to be honest with you. An amber warning enforced though for the coastal overtopping, so a lot of splash over in exposed areas at time of high tide tonight. That's about 11 p.m. tonight, so for the likes of the north of Douglas Prom, parts of the south and a few other places, there'll be a lot of splash over for a time, so an hour or so either side of high tide. Watch out for that if you're in those areas. That's probably the most significant amber warning for that. We've also got a yellow warning for inner harbour flooding, so some of the harbours may see a little bit of flooding for a short time around high tide. That's again at 11 p.m. this evening.
The matrix signs heading towards the mountain at Sulby, Hilbury, Barrow and Albert Road, Ramsey are all showing fog on the mountain road, so please drive to the conditions. The Treasury Minister says Isle of Man's income should reach more than £1 billion next year, but the government's still going to need to dip into reserves. Dr Allinson, MHK, has been defending criticism of how much money government's taking from reserves.
We've got an economic strategy which was endorsed by Tynwald, which looks at two things. One looks at how we're going to afford the public services we have on the Isle of Man and putting more money, particularly into health and education, to grow the active working population. But secondly, to actually widen the tax base, because we know that people on the Isle of Man have got relatively low wages. That's why the commitment to increase the minimum wage and par it to the living wage by 2025 is really important. We also need to make sure that the prosperity that the Isle of Man has is spread evenly across our population. And so drawing down on those reserves in the right way as part of a 5-year financial plan to then come back on balance is the right thing to do, given the market volatility we've got at the moment and given what both our nation and the world has been through over the last 3 years. Government doesn't stop over the summer. We've been working very hard on these long-term predictions. What we know is that inflation is now coming down, but we also know that there is an in-baked pressure there, particularly in terms of wages and the necessity to fund frontline services again. So what we're looking for in the budget next year is that long-term stability. Next year's budget, we forecast that income will be up to £1.058 billion, and we're on track for that with increased tax receipts. But we also predicted that we'd need to draw down around about £84 million from reserves next year and gradually reduce that over the 5-year financial plan. And certainly those predictions are online at the moment, but there will be further work to be done with various departments to make sure that they can try to stick to the allocated budgets, but also make sure that we have the leeway there to deal with some of the pay increases that are being requested at the moment in a balanced way.
The Isle of Man in 30 minutes. Update on Manx Radio with Andy Wint.
Thanks for dropping by. We'll have details of the cancellations, and there are quite a few of them at Ronaldsway this evening in the next 10 minutes. A good defensive display wasn't enough for FC Isle of Man as they were on the wrong end of a narrow 1-0 defeat against Bury at Gig Lane in the NWCFL Premier Division last night. Speaking to FC Isle of Man's official channel at full time, the manager Paul Jones was happy with large aspects of his team's performance and believes on another day the result could have been different.
Disappointed that we've not come away with something. I thought the players performed really, really well, and we've solved all of the out of possession stuff that we've spoken about the last few weeks. And we're excellent for large parts of the game, and maybe just in that final third of the pitch didn't quite have the final quality of delivery or finish in order to take advantage of the good play that we've had. We're thoroughly enjoyed the occasion. The travelling conspiracy of Ravens were absolutely fantastic, and it was amazing to see so many of them either travel from the island or come from various parts of the UK to be here. And I hope they had a really good night and are proud of the lads and the performance that they put in, and unfortunately it just wasn't quite enough to get the 3 points. Really good test again waiting for us on Saturday with Wimenshaw, who have started this season really, really well, and we're going to need to at least repeat, if not with a little bit added quality, what we did tonight. And the lads have set their standard once again, and we know they're capable of it, and it's about delivering that level of performance week after week after week at this level. And if we do that, we'll be in a really, really good place. We're Nats hair away, aren't we, tonight, from coming away with a really pleasing performance in terms of points on the board. And we can't lose sight of all the positive things that happened this evening for the club and for the players. From my point of view, they delivered what we asked them to do, and it just wasn't quite enough on this occasion. But there'll be other days where it's more than enough, and we can be pleased with a good night's work.
One of the Isle of Man's most iconic food producers is set to close its doors. Moore's Smokehouse in Peel, been operating for more than 140 years, will shut this weekend. Here's Amy Griffiths.
One of Peel's most iconic landmarks, the Smokehouse is the last traditional Manx Kipper yard, smoking the same way since it was built in 1882. In a lengthy social media post, the current tenants announced they can no longer run the operations there. Darren says he and Jen tried to turn around a dinosaur, but that now it's game over. He adds that they're tapped out and can't do anything else to save the most iconic food / kipper producing / amazing smokehouse the Isle of Man has to offer. The tenants say they're now raising cash to clear their final debts with local food producers and wholesale companies. They'll be hosting a closing down sale this weekend to sell any remaining kippers as well as kitchen equipment and other items before closing the doors for good on Sunday. Any Manx National Heritage tours booked with them have also been cancelled. Darren says his dream is over and it's now time to stare bankruptcy down the barrel and set straight the Grill Pit Limited's affairs.
Sea Watch with the Isle of Man Steam Packet Company.
Nothing much happening so far. Today's sailings were all cancelled, but Manxman is currently in Heysham. And the 0215 sailing from Heysham to Douglas will depart as scheduled, arriving back in Douglas at 6 tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning's departure is 8:45 Ben Macree to Heysham. Will be going due to the forecast adverse weather. Sailing tomorrow afternoon's 2 o'clock Manannan to Liverpool will be decided at midday.
Follow the Steam Packet on Twitter for the latest sailing information.
Tynwald will be asked to give the go-ahead and suspend the work permit system next month, which the Enterprise Minister hopes will remove any perceived barriers and entice more skilled workers to the Isle of Man. Onken MHK Rob Callister isn't convinced.
I think the Minister is wrong when he uses the word perception. I think the Isle of Man is fighting for to obtain the same workers as in the UK. Our nurses, our teachers, our doctors, etc. But the Isle of Man work permit is not the problem here. The Isle of Man work permit system has been very successful since 1952. And we also have an exemption list which can turn on any industry or off any industry at any time. And that has also been very successful. And I'm certainly not seeing the evidence why we should be switching off our work permit here today. What is very clear from the evidence is our infrastructure is not ready. Manxcare, for example, there are 9,700 residents waiting for a first appointment referral. Then we look at our NHS dentists, 3,939 people waiting to access a dentist. This is where the government's focus should be. We then look at schools. Primary schools on the Isle of Man in North Douglas and Onken are currently at 98% of capacity, with only Ashley Hill in Onken that has some available space. If we widen that question a little bit further to look at the south of the island, it's a very similar position than Douglas North and Onken. But if you look to the west of the island, there is some capacity. In Douglas South, there is capacity there as well. My main concern as an MHK is in relation to our 5 main secondary schools on the island, which are showing above capacity. And even if we take into account the mobile units that are being used, capacity is still at around 96%. Therefore, there is no room for further population growth without significant investment in our secondary schools first.
Manx Radio Business Briefing.
At 16 minutes before 6, in corporate news, the UK's largest commercial property development and investment company, Land Securities, lost ground even though it reported a rise in lettings over the first 5 months of the financial year as demand for office space held up despite rising interest rates. And for a full daily market report, go to ramseycrookall.com. H&M says it needs to do better to improve consistency in clothes sizing after it faced a backlash to its new returns fee for online items. After the fee was revealed, Sheffield last week, many shoppers reacted saying if sizing was more consistent, they'd actually return less. One shopper said the difference between same-size garments was staggering. When asked about the issue by the BBC, H&M's boss said there's always an improvement to make, but said the firm was taking proactive steps to ensure that whatever customers buy, they want to keep. For instance, by improving H&M's size guides for customers. Under its new fee, H&M customers must pay £1.99 to return items bought online, with the cost taken from their refund. Previously, all returns were free.
The Stock Market Report, brought to you by Ramsey Crookall.
UK and European markets slipped as investors continued to assess inflation, interest rates and the health of the global economy. US stocks retreated from early gains. Oil rose by more than $1 a barrel and gold fell to the lowest in more than a month. The numbers from Ramsey Crookall reporting at the close in London. The FTSE 100 down 0.4% at 7,593. The DAX in Frankfurt down 0.25% at the close, 15,217. A short time ago in New York City, the Dow Jones Industrial down 0.25% at 33,537. The Nasdaq Tech Stocks Index up 0.1% at 13,076, and the S&P 500 in the Midwest down 0.04%, but still down 4,271. In the exchange markets, the British pound sterling trading at $1 21.3 cents, €1 15.4 cents, and 23 South African rand 29.5 cents. In commodities, gold's down almost a percentage point at $1,881 per troy ounce, and a barrel of Brent crude up 2% at $94.35.
You've got an investment plan?
Yeah, Mike set it up.
But don't you need loads of money to do that?
Not this one. It's called Shearwater from Ramsey Crookall, and you pay in monthly as little as £100. So it's like saving regularly, really helping us invest in the future for a house, or the kids' education.
£100 a month? I could easily do that.
You should. The sooner you start, the better.
Invest in your future with as little as £100 a month. Shearwater from Ramsey Crookall, the island's investment specialist for 75 years. Call 717171 or visit ramseycrookall.com. Licensed and regulated by the Isle of Man Financial Services Authority.
13 minutes before 6 on Manx Radio with a talk about the Department of Infrastructure starting a housing association, but Appeal Commissioner says he has concerns about housing associations splitting people from their communities. Commissioner Alan Jones says the local authority put forward a suggestion that it manages all DOI housing in the west of the Isle of Man, but nothing was done.
The slight advantage at the moment with Peel managing its list is that we keep our community together rather than moving people around to other parts of the island unnecessarily. Then if you had an all-island list, your sort of community ties might be weakened, so we'd need to look at that. That's another factor to be considered. We personally haven't had direct dealings with any housing associations on the Isle of Man, but after the original Tolson report a number of years ago, Peel and the Western parishes commissioners got together and submitted a plan for us to manage all the government's houses and as well as Peel's houses in the West, and set up a committee to do that and relieve the department of it. They sat on it. Which is very disappointing considering that it was one of the Tynwald objectives that had been put in after the Tolson report. So it's interesting to see that they're now looking at a housing association to manage their houses.
Update brought to you by Simcox Advocates. Manx Radio Sport.
Faster my Rob Pritchard.
Faster my, good evening. Starting with cycling, and is there one last encore for Mark Cavendish and another shot at Tour de France immortality next season? This week, Dutch media outlet AD is reporting a deal is potentially close between the Manx Missile and Astana Kazakhstan to extend his contract by one further year for 2024, with the only possible block at this stage being several rights agreements. At this year's Tour, Cavendish was chasing the all-time Tour stage win record of 35. He's currently tied on 34 victories with cycling legend Eddie Merckx. However, his dream was shattered when a crash on stage 8 saw him suffer a fractured collarbone and ruled him out of the rest of the event. It's currently expected that Cavendish will return to competitive action at next month's Presidential Cycling Tour of Turkey. Back in May at this year's Giro d'Italia, the 38-year-old announced he intends to retire at the end of the current season. In cricket, the Isle of Man men's campaign of the European Cricket Championship came to an end today as they suffered defeat in their Group A eliminator match earlier after losses to Spain and France in their their final group games yesterday, the Manx side faced Greece this morning, a side they'd beaten in the group stage back on Monday. But a tough session at the Katama Oval in Malaga saw the Ireland squad beaten by 5 wickets this time around after setting a target of 90, which Greece overhauled in just under the 10-over limit. In darts, Day 2 has been taking place for Team Isle of Man at the WDF World Cup in Denmark, with the men's singles competition running throughout the day. Isle of Man's Aaron Bradley and Robbie Nelson suffered defeats in the first round, whilst Adi Hogg was beaten in the round of 128 4-1 by Canada's Robbie Mills. The World Cup is taking place in Esbjerg until Saturday. And finally, in football, tonight's latest fixtures in the Jackson's Isle of Man Under-18s League at the Bowl have been postponed amid the poor weather conditions locally. Jims have been due to play their first game of the season against Russian United, whilst Braddon had been scheduled to face Ramsey. The fixtures will be rearranged in due course.
Manx Radio Travel, driven by Quayside Tyres and Service Centre.
Inbound at Ronaldsway, the 4 o'clock Aer Lingus from Dublin was cancelled. The 10 to 6 Loganair from Manchester will be coming in 5 minutes late. 6:30 EasyJet from Belfast International is on time. The 10 to 8 Loganair from London City and the 8:20 Loganair from Liverpool are both cancelled, as is the 25 to 9 inbound from London Gatwick EasyJet. Outbound, the 4:30 back to Dublin was cancelled. The 4:30 Loganair to London City cancelled. 6:25 Loganair to Liverpool cancelled. The 7 o'clock EasyJet to Belfast International scheduled on time to depart, and the 9:05 EasyJet back to Gatwick has been cancelled. Temporary lights at Berlig Bridge near St John's. There was a problem at Craig Willis Hill with a downed telephone pole, so watch out for that. The Ballagorn Road's closed for ditching work at the moment. Hillside Avenue in Douglas closed and its junction through to Circular Road for adjacent office window replacement. Freeway traffic lights for resurfacing at Victoria Road. Look out for that, was causing problems yesterday. Newcastle Town Road's closed between Spring Valley Roundabout and the bottom of Richmond Hill for resurfacing. The junction at the bottom of Richmond Hill has been reopened. Traffic diverted along the Energy from Waste Plant access road at the top of Quegg Hill.
H&HMotorcycles.im for all your motorcycle requirements. Southgate Industrial Estate, opposite Quayside Tyres. Call 665646.
A Garth MHK says red tape needs to be removed to help authorities deal with the owners of dilapidated houses. In the last census, 5,695 residential properties were recorded as being vacant. Andrew Smith MHK says it needs addressing.
What we're trying to do is, you may have heard in recent days that we were trying to look at adjusting the rate system to bring in additional rates, penalties for people that leave these properties abandoned. I can again speak from experience in my days on the commissioners, and there has been a property on the new road in Laxey which has never ever been occupied since I've been here, and there's the odd person that comes every now and again to make it look as though something's happening, and nothing has happened to that property, and that's right in the centre of the village. But we need to really grapple with this situation, and I think it may well be that the deterrent, it must be through the rateable system. Now you may say, well, if it's an errant owner, then he won't pay the additional rates or he won't pay the additional surcharge. But what we do is that we would then put a charge on the house so that as and when it was eventually sold, we would then be able to reclaim. Now I know it may not be the most satisfactory situation, but I think we need to address this through the rate system so that we actually make a penalty for people that leave houses. We need these properties, because if all these properties are aligned like this on the Isle of Man, we would not have such a critical housing situation as we have currently. So I think we've got to encourage people, and if that means by veiled threat, as it were, through the rate system, then I think that's what we have to do, and hopefully that will then appease the situation. I think also that in fairness to commissioners, I know Garth commissioners have been very active in some of these things, but it may seem that they feel that they're walking in trickle a bit, so that somewhere in the system there is this barrier between the commissioners and councils generally being able to act and the central government authorities being able to support them in that action, and there just seems to be some dichotomy there.
Update brought to you by Simcox Advocates, advising businesses and families since 1949. Visit simcox.com or call 690 300.
A consultation on changes to Isle of Man Energy's finances won't impact customers' bills. That clarification comes from the Communications and Utilities Regulatory Authority as it seeks feedback on proposed changes to the cost of debt and working capital allowance for the Isle of Man's gas supplier. Cura's chief exec is Ivan Kiley.
Both of them have a relatively minor impact on the tariff. It's like fractions of a penny, but one, as proposed, will put it up and the other puts it down. So there should be no real change to the tariff as a result of these measures. It's more just to make sure everything is done correctly is more the purpose of this consultation.
And are they intrinsically linked then? So if one of these happens, the other will as well?
No, not necessarily. It's more just that they were the two items that were not completely bottomed out in the last consultation process. So it just so happened that they're happening at the same time rather than that they're interlinked. They're actually two separate issues, which is even why in the consultation we've tried to deal with them as two separate issues, not trying to say, well, the two are linked. If one does one, the other has to do something else. That it doesn't work that way. We were primarily just concerned that it might be causing some unnecessary anxiety for consumers, and we just want to make sure that there's clarity around what we're actually saying in the consultation and also what that impact will be. And you know, it's kind of it is quite a technical issue. It's with the best will in the world, we know that, you know, regulatory frameworks and things are never going to be the most interesting of topics for most people. So we just wanted to make sure that there was just accurate information out there, and that what we're talking about was clear, and that when we say that something will have, you know, the impact would be that it would increase the tariff, that we're only talking about that one parameter in isolation. Like, so when we're talking about cost of debt would potentially increase the tariff, something else will potentially decrease it, and they're all just part of an overall sum that gets put together to make up what the tariff is, not that it's actually what we're saying is going to happen with the tariffs.
That's it for Update Tonight, compiled from the resources of Manx Radio's news department. Thanks to newsreader Chanel Suku, producer Amy Griffiths. After the news at 6, in the world of arts with Howie Kane in Spotlight, the greatest hits with Chris Kinley at 6:30, Ernie Thorne in the Opera Hour at 9, and Rianne with The Late Show at 10.
WINT